Well, hello everybody. Oh, I'm sorry, you can't see my lips moving. Okay, here we go. Can you read my lips? There you are. I am so thrilled. You know how excited I am every week when I have a chance to read to you. And you remember what we're doing. We're reading a collection of bedtime Bible stories for children, and it's by Father Homer Rogers. And I've said a little bit about him, but every week I get a chance to do this. I'm so excited. And you know, the last couple of times, Betty, we had to do this almost virtually. I had you on the iPad. But today, how do we work this out that we're together again? I drove over to your house. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But then I look over here, it looks like you doubled because I see somebody next to you. Who is this? Tell me who this is.
It's my best friend.
It's your best friend. What's your best friend's name?
Victoria.
Oh. Do you have all your teeth?
No.
Okay, just checking because Betty's still working.
Like they grew back, but I didn't have them earlier.
So for a while you were like Betty, no front. Yeah, you know, I think we've all gone through that, haven't we? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Although some of the adults are missing a few teeth too, but the bad news for them is they're not growing back. But anyway, here we have this wonderful, wonderful book here, and over here. Wait a minute. Before I'm looking at a T-shirt. Do any of you have T-shirts that are kind of fun to wear? I want to look. Let me see. This says what? Granddaughter and grandpa, best partners in crime. I am his accomplice, and he is my alibi.
Yeah.
Who is this fella that you're talking about?
Yo.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm glad to be a partner in crime with you. Yeah, that's great fun for me. And how many of you have you ever been to a wedding?
I once was a flower girl when I was like really little. I can't remember.
Yeah, but you remember that there was a wedding that you were the flower girl, which is kind of fun. Have you ever been to a wedding?
No, but I will.
Well, what do you mean you will? Somebody getting married in your family? No kidding. Who?
My uncle.
Oh my goodness. I think that's a good idea, isn't it? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about a double wedding and a midnight wrestler. It's from the 29th chapter Genesis, and so it goes on about 6 chapters. So we're going to get started now. So, last week we talked about Isaac. Remember that? Well, Isaac's wife, Rebekah, had a brother named Laban. As luck would have it, when Jacob came to the country of his mother's people, he fell in with a bunch of ranch hands that worked for Laban. With them was the prettiest girl he'd ever seen. She was Rachel, Laban's youngest daughter, and it was love at first sight. So, Jacob went home with Rachel and met the kinsfolk and told his uncle Laban all that had happened and why he had come to visit him. Jacob went to work for his uncle and became like a member of the family. Laban had 2 daughters. The older daughter, Leah, was rather plain, with soft, large, tender eyes and a sweet face and disposition sort of quiet and modest. The younger girl, Rachel, was a vivid, beautiful girl with flashing eyes and an impish smile. What's an impish smile look like? Let's see.
I don't know.
Oh, give me your best smile. All right, those are good smiles. Okay. And full of fun and frolic. Jacob was completely captivated by Rachel, and he agreed to work for Laban for 7 years if he'd let him marry Rachel. Laban, who knew a good thing when he saw it, agreed. So, Jacob went to work on Laban's ranch for 7 years, and it seemed like the 7 years were no more than 7 days because of his love for Rachel. At the end of 7 years, Jacob went to Laban and said, "Let's arrange for the wedding. The 7 years are all over." Well, they planned a big wedding. Friends and relatives came from miles around, feasting and dancing. I'll bet you there was even a flower girl. Well, sir, that Laban was a foxy one. They had a custom in that country that the younger daughters couldn't get married until the older ones were married off. So Laban took his older daughter Leah and dressed her up in a wedding dress and covered her face with a veil. And they had the ceremony. When it was all over and Leah lifted her veil, Jacob saw that he had married the wrong girl. I guess that's where he said, surprise. And boy, was he furious. Poor Leah must have felt really bad because Jacob turned away from her and went raging up to his father-in-law and said, what's the meaning of this? For 7 years I worked for you for free so that I could marry Rachel, and you've switched girls on me. And he said a lot of other things I think I better not repeat. Boy, was he mad. Laban explained to him about their custom of marrying off the older girls first, didn't even apologize for deceiving him, was sort of smug and superior about it all, but there Jacob was, already married to Leah. So he agreed with Laban to work for him still another 7 years. For the younger daughter, he was pretty put out. But Jacob loved Rachel, so he would have agreed to work 70 years if he had to. So, about a week later, they had another big wedding, and now Jacob found himself with 2 wives. Whoa, that's tricky, isn't it? He loved Rachel so much more than Leah, although he had to admit that Leah was a really nice, sweet girl. That even though the girls were sisters, it was easy to see there was going to be jealousy and friction in the family. And there was. The 2 girls didn't get along well with each other at all, and the situation wasn't helped any when it turned out that Leah began to have children right and left. A fine family of good-looking boys, but Rachel didn't have any children at all. Rachel fussed at Jacob about it, like it was somehow his fault. Jacob got mad at Rachel, and they had a first-class family quarrel. The 7 years passed, and several more, and Jacob kept on working for Laban, and he was now in charge of the whole ranch, like a manager or a foreman. Finally, at long last, Rachel had a son and named him Joseph. You know anybody named Joseph? Mm-hmm. That's a good name. We'll be hearing quite a bit more about this Joseph, for it turns out that he was to be a really very, very important person. Rachel was beside herself with joy, and Jacob was pretty pleased too. Jacob had now been working for his father-in-law for nearly 20 years, and he decided it was about time for him to go back home to his own people. So he went to Laban and told him he wanted to pack up and go. Now, Jacob had been such a good manager of Laban's ranch that he had gotten richer and richer, and Laban didn't want to lose him. They argued and bickered, and Jacob felt he was entitled to some back wages. But Laban didn't want to go on at all, and certainly didn't want to give him any extra wages. They finally agreed that Jacob was to work 1 more year. And after that, they would divide the flocks and herds. Jacob was to have for his own all the spotted sheep and cattle, and Laban was to keep the white ones. Do you think you could tell the difference between white sheep and cattle and spotted ones? Do you think the spots would be pretty, well, it's like a leopard. Can you see what a leopard looks like? So think about all the spots, or a Dalmatian dog. Well, sir, for all that year, it seemed like every lamb or calf that was born on the place was spotted or speckled. And at the end of the year, Jacob had a huge flock of sheep and cattle. He gathered up everything that he owned and lit out for home without even saying goodbye. Before they left, Rachel had gone into her daddy's private chapel. You know what private chapel is like, right? You know, we have a private chapel in our house, don't we? Yeah. And helped herself to a lot of the statues and religious articles. I guess that would be like you going in there and taking St. Francis.
I would be like, oh, I want to see what this is. Okay, I'm gonna keep this and then I'll get back.
Yeah, no, it makes sense, because when you go into churches and chapels, is your daddy a priest?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so are there some things in your church that are really pretty and nice?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it'd be like you go into some of these chapels and say, I want that, I want that, I want that. Mm-hmm. So that's what she did. And then when Laban discovered the,
I like the flowers.
The flowers are super nice.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
I don't hear Mom.
Yeah, they work together.
Yeah, we, my mom and your mom, they do the flowers.
Does that mean they're flower girls?
No.
Oh, is that a different thing?
Yeah.
Okay. So when Laban discovered that Jacob and his family had gone and that he was missing some of the things from his chapel, he chased after Jacob and caught up with him about 3 days' journey away. Laban accused Jacob of stealing and fussed at him for running off without giving him a chance to say goodbye to his daughters and his grandchildren. Jacob got real sore and denied stealing anything and offered to let Laban search through all the baggage. Rachel hadn't told Jacob about swiping all those statues from his private chapel. So she sat down in a big chair and she cleverly hid the statues under her skirt. Laban searched through all the luggage and naturally he didn't find what he was looking for. This left him puzzled, for he was certain somebody had made off with his things. But he apologized, made a big supper, and said goodbye again and again. As they got closer and closer to where Esau lived, Jacob got more and more worried because he remembered Esau's threat to kill him for taking his birthright and his blessing. Remember last week when he put the wool on his arms and thought he was hairy and kind of stole the birthright, Esau and Jacob? So he sent his messengers ahead to find out how things worked. And they came back and told him that Esau was coming that way with 400 soldiers. Whoa.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. 400 soldiers were coming to you. Do you think they'd be coming to take you out for lunch? No. Okay. Jacob knew then that he was a goner, but he kept his head. He divided his family and his flocks into 2 bands and separated them by quite some distance. He told them if Esau attacked one band, the other one was to run like crazy away from there. Then Jacob gathered up a huge herd of sheep and goats, and camels and cows and donkeys, and divided them up into a number of different groups and sent them on ahead of him, separated from one another by a mile or 2. Old Esau and his 400 soldiers were coming on to meet Jacob. He got wind of the fact that Jacob was coming home somehow. And on the way, he came across a herd of cattle being driven by some cowboys. And he said to one of the cowboys, "What's this?" Or if he's a cowboy, maybe, "What's this?" And the cowboy said, "Go ahead, you do it."
What's this?
That sounds good. And the cowboy said, "That's it. These cattle are a present that your brother Jacob is sending to you." A little while later, Esau met another bunch of cattle, and still another, and another, and the cowboys in charge of each one of them said, "These are a present Jacob is sending you." Jacob figured that by sending Esau a lot of gifts, a lot of times, he'd soften him up so he wouldn't be as mad at him when they finally met. Jacob pitched camp that night by a river. And after supper, he went off by himself to say some prayers and to think things out. Maybe he fell asleep, maybe not. To you, it seemed real enough, though. Anyway, a stranger came along and challenged Jacob to a wrestling match. Whoa. Have you ever watched wrestling on TV? No,
It's
good.
so scary.
It is scary. Now, Jacob fancied himself pretty good at wrestling. But this stranger was good too, and they wrestled all night long until about daybreak. And the stranger said, "Let me go, turn me loose, it'll soon be daylight." Jacob tightened his grip on the fellow and he said, "I'm not going to turn you loose until you promise to give me a blessing." For by that time, Jacob had begun to suspect that this stranger was no ordinary man, but some sort of an angel from God. The stranger promised to bless him. Jacob turned him loose, and the stranger gave him a blessing and said, from now on, your name is not going to be Jacob. I mean, all his life he was going to go by Jacob, and now he's telling, he's going to have a name change. So, your name now is going to become Israel. Israel. Can you say his new name?
Israel.
That's it. That's how Jacob got his other name, and from then on, everybody called him Israel. And all his descendants are called the children of Israel, or the Israelites. Jacob was pretty tired out from wrestling all night. And he knew for sure that he hadn't been wrestling with any ordinary human being. When the sun came up good and hot, and Jacob figured he'd better be getting back before his wives and children got to worrying about where he was, he discovered that sometime during all that wrestling, he'd thrown a hip out of Joseph.
What?
Yeah, his hip right here, that somehow must have been a crack when he was wrestling, and he walked with a limp. Have you ever seen anybody walk with a limp, or like you've hurt your leg? Well, he walked with a limp the rest of his life. The next day, they met Esau, and Esau acted glad to see Jacob and told him he wasn't mad at him anymore, and that he needn't have given him all those cattle. Jacob didn't quite trust him, though, so he insisted that he keep the presents he'd given him, and Esau agreed. Then Jacob, whose new name is Israel, came to a place called Succoth. There he built himself a fine house with lots of barns and feedlots for his cattle, and settled down and became a prosperous rancher. You know what a prosperous rancher is? Pretty rich.
I know what a ranch is.
You know what a ranch is? The word prosperous, that means like really rich. So,
are you the richest person on earth?
yeah, well, he might have been at least around there. Yeah, see? And so, by now, he had gotten all of these things. He looked up old Isaac. Remember who Isaac was? Isaac. That's his daddy. And he was still alive. Even though he was very, very old, he was still alive. But after having a chance to see his son again, Isaac died. And Jacob had 12 sons. 12 sons. And the youngest of all of them was named Joseph, Rachel's boy. And Joseph was quite a remarkable lad. Now guess what? You're going to be hearing a lot more about him. But you're going to have to tune in next week so we can see all about this Joseph, what happened to him, and some amazing things to go with it. So what do you think? I mean, were there any names in the Bible today, a story that you heard that you wish your name was, or you'd name your child if you ever had a child? Would you name your child Esau? How about Esau? How about Israel? No. What about Rachel?
Yeah. Maybe.
Okay, maybe. What about Leah?
No. I don't like that name.
Okay, so these are some names you can think about.
I would do just Jacob.
Would you? Now you can do it Joseph, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes
I do like Joseph.
Do you? Well, there's some really good names in the Bible, and it's fun to be able to name your children after some Bible characters, and that can be a lot of fun. But you know what's really fun for me? My fun is being able to have double fun today. Yeah, because I had a chance to read this story to both of you today. And for me, that was a lot of fun, especially my partner in crime with her t-shirt and her best friend, Victoria. And all of my friends out there, thank you so much for tuning in. And next week, we're going to read something called Joseph Sold into Egypt. God bless you. Have a wonderful week, and we'll talk soon.